I will be talking about a project called Forest Monitor. Actually, in Swedish, we call it Skogsmonitor. It means the same thing. We are trying to monitoring Swedish forest. And it is me, and we now have recently hired a guy who is also working together with me with remote sensing. And then we have Victor Save. I will stand a little bit closer to this, maybe instead. I will try to. Sorry. That's much better. Yeah, let's move on. We had this pointer here. Where is the pointing button? Oh, there. Thank you. So what we are actually doing is to do retrospective analysis of the forest landscape. And I made this example this week. I was sitting at home thinking about how to visualize what is actually the problem with our forest landscape in Sweden. We have much more of remaining old growth forest in Sweden, I guess, than most parts of Europe, because we have a completely different forestry history. We can actually go back to the 40s with aerial photography. In the very south part of Sweden, we can reach back to the 30s. And I see many projects there like using this series back to the 80s. And in Swedish terms, we can only reach so far with that. We can see that even before the 80s, we had quite a lot of logging going on, clear cutting actually. We need to go back to the 40s to find the forest landscape that, yeah, the open patches is mostly farmland here. And then later we start to get also forestry. I happen to come from this place. This is my home village. So I know pretty much everything about these forest landscapes, and that's also why I chose it. So when I was a kid, I was 9 years old in '84, I could walk around in these forests, and actually I was like a free spirit as a child, and I was walking around a lot in these forests, and as you see today, we only had two bigger patches of forest. And then you might say that, oh, well, you seem to have quite a lot of forest in Sweden, like you have two big patches already here. But, oh, sorry. If we zoom out a bit, we see that we happen to have two quite big nature reserves in my home village. And this is the surrounding area. It's completely lacking protected forest. And of course, we have patches of forest in this landscape which are old, but they are rapidly disappearing. So it's not like we have very little left and we have actually protected that. It is, although there is almost nothing left, it's still logging. The logging is still going on. So it is, and this is what we are tracking, also the logging. And I just wanted to show this. This is the image from the 40s, and the forest landscape, it was like a landscape of old growth forest. We had some selective logging that had been going on for about 100 years before this, from the 1850s, but it was never clear cutting, at least in northern part of Sweden, so they were selectively logged. The difference now is that the other part of the landscape, which has now been harvested once, it is usually planted with pine. And although we have had a cover of spruce forest or mixed stands, it is usually planted with pine. So this image is taken here, and this image is taken here. And the difference is quite staggering. And the thing is that when we look at photos taken from there, yeah, you can certainly see a difference between 1940s and today, but still there's quite a lot of, there's a forest cover. It's not like the forest is gone, it grows back again. And I will talk a little bit about what the problem is with these images that we are trying to interpret what is happening under here. What is happening to the species diversity when we log the forest and exchange it for something completely different. This is some images I took in Austria last weekend, and we have kind of the same thing going on, although it is very, very little left, I think, in Austria. Like in the very, very steepest part of the landscape and up close to the forest, like up to the mountains, we have something resembling old growth forest. As soon as you go a little bit farther down, it's just plantation everywhere. This is taken in Finland. I was in Finland 3 weeks ago. There was a river on one side. It was pristine forest with pine. On the other side, plantation. So we have this going on pretty much everywhere, but the extent of this part of the landscape, of course, varies a lot in countries in Europe. So what is the problem with these landscapes? The ones that on one hand is forestry, like based or dominated landscapes, and natural landscapes when we have some sort of natural variation going on. If we look at the stand level of natural disturbance in a natural landscape, we have dips in volume of trees at disturbance events. And they happen more or less randomly, depending on which disturbance agent is traveling to the landscape. When it comes to biodiversity, if we have a lot of disturbance event, of course, the old growth specialists, their populations, they will go down slightly, and then they will bounce back again. If we have a really, really big disturbance, like a stand replacing disturbance event, like in boreal forest, we might have a fire. Then, of course, it will go down quite a lot, but it will bounce back. In a disturbance, in a landscape with forestry going on stand level, we will have growth up to a certain level when the age is, like the forest is ripe, and then we harvest it. And then we do it over and over again. And as more and more stands in this landscape have undergone this change, biodiversity will actually go down until it cannot bounce back again, because there will be no sources left for that biodiversity to spread from. So although we have some reserves in some parts of the landscape, they will be so wide apart so that the species, they cannot actually bounce back into. And we see this many times now. Actually, it's close to the coast and in the southern parts of Sweden, we see that the forest can look quite good. There can be quite a lot of dead wood and everything looks fine, but the species aren't there, which is highly problematic. And that's something we need to work on to like make it possible for species to reappear in the landscape. A little bit about the methodology. As I said in the beginning, we are working with 2 sets of data, basically. We use Landsat only for change detection to do a retrospective analysis back to the 80s. But to reach farther back in time, we have to use historical aerial photos, which are really, really difficult to work with. They are not homogeneic in color or in, they are grayscale images with very little information, let's say. But we have a few different methodologies to work with these. We will soon introduce a new one. We can reach back to the 50s with these, and we have images back to the 40s. And as I can see, if I look through the archives, pretty much the entire continent of Europe has these sort of photos as well. So we have now started to work on Finland, doing the same thing there. So we have a group of people working on this there now to map Finland. We use some data from the Forest Agency. They can provide data back to the 2000s. We will probably go over to do this part ourselves, the continuous updating of the data to remove patches which has been logged. And we use a mask, of course, for the forest landscape so that we know that it is actually forest landscape we are working on. The product we provide today comes in 3 parts. It's an information page. Here you have the web address. The web address. There is a map, and we have statistics. You can go in and look how much is harvested and how much is filed for logging of different kinds of forests. We don't stop just by finding the old forest in the landscape. We also classify the forest in the landscape in 3 different classes. So we have known high conservation values where we are 100% sure that these forests are actually have high conservation values. And those are usually woodland key habitats. We have formal protection, and we have other service from the authorities where we are absolutely sure that we have actually targeted the best patches in the landscape. We have one class in the middle called the probable conservation values. And in Sweden, we have something called the Species Information Center, which is a huge database with species finds, with coordinates. So we take this whole database, and then we look at where these finds have been done in the landscape. So if someone has been here and found a lot of red-listed species, we can assume that this forest is actually quite good for biodiversity. Otherwise, they would never find these species here. Because outside in this landscape where there has been clear cutting, we know that these species they don't exist there. They cannot bounce back that fast in this landscape. So that's like the middle class, and this is really good because this is something that is continuously growing as people are out doing inventories. This is a big thing in Sweden too. When I went down in Finland and we're talking to them about forest inventories, it's not such a big thing there. They are more looking at structures, and it's very hard to report structures in any database. People usually don't, and there are no really good databases for it. We have a final class here, which is we don't know other than that we have classified it in the remote sensing survey. So we see that they are probably not clear-cut, at least back to the 50s. And in many times, actually, they are good. I will show you examples of that. These are just images of how this map service looks in different parts of the country. We have one frame here from the southern part of the country. We have my home county, Västerbotten here. I've done a lot of inventories here in different parts of this landscape, working at the county administrative board in the past. Here is from Jämtland County. And as you see, it is a highly fragmented forest landscape with most of the forest being clear-cut before. On the web map, you cannot only see the patches of all forest left, you can also see the loggings, or actually these are the logging notifications. So we have old logging notifications that are more than 6 weeks old, and we have newer ones that are within 6 weeks time frame. And this is important because in Sweden, you file for a logging and you have 6 weeks until the authority has decided. But they actually don't decide anything. It is an automatic procedure. So they usually go through automatically. I could say that also that in Sweden, there are about 65,000 logging notifications every year. And out of these, we as volunteers doing environmental work, looking for species, and actually doing something to survey these before logging, we can maybe manage a couple of hundred, maybe 1,000 a year at the most. So it is like a quite hopeless situation, and the authorities, they don't really do anything. They don't have any resources for it. So it's very problematic. These are executed loggings since the 2000s. So you see that this is like going on the whole time, and this is done after we created the data. So here it is. Yeah, there used to be an old forest there, but it's gone. We will extend this data now back to the 80s with data we have created, and in the future we will also add, of course, data going back to the 50s. And then, of course, everything this around here, it will be this yellow executed loggings. Another nice thing, because we have this database, is that we can connect it to their database immediately. So you can search with a polygon when you've done, or anyone else has done a survey, and you can see which species have been found inside these forests. So this is a forest I inventoried quite many years ago now. And just for fun, I made a polygon around it to see which species were found there, and this seems to be the list. I can't recall seeing all of these, but I guess I did. And this can be done all over the country. Now, don't hear me wrong here. This doesn't mean that all of these patches has been surveyed. Some has and some haven't. So you cannot go anywhere and see what species are there. Only where people have been before. We of course do that data validation. This is a work going on as we speak here today. We do the service in 10,000 hectare landscapes. Out of these landscapes, we have mapped some old forest in the landscape. We choose 1,000 hectares, I would say semi-randomly, because we choose the biggest first, and that's only because of logistic reasons, that if we would choose completely random, we would have a lot of these tiny patches to serve, and it would take forever. We have done this in a few frames already. We have another 4 up here that are surveyed now. And what we can see is that in these landscapes, and we look in southern part of Sweden, or about 25 to 35% is mapped as old forest. If we go farther north, it is a little bit more. So this means that in a landscape we have surveyed of 10,000 hectares, about 32 or 44% is mapped as old forest. If we go into these old forests, like these 1,000 hectares we have chosen within the landscape and survey them, we see that in this western part of Sweden, 60 to 75% is actually, it reaches the target for formal protection. Which means that if the county administrative board in these counties would go to the SEPA, the Swedish Environment Protection Agency, and say that they wanted to protect it, they would have nothing against that, because it reaches the target for conservation status. And this is of course good for our survey, because we want to target these forests. And if we can make a map over the whole country showing where we have the highest risk of hitting these forests by harvesting in the old forest, we can actually make a risk map, like a risk. If you're up here, we know that we have much more forest with high conservation values, but we don't know the percentage. But if we have this service done over the country, we can say that, oh, well, if you're up here, there's actually an 80% chance or risk that you will harvest the forest with high conservation values. And then we can say that both to the customers and to the forestry company and to the authorities, which is very helpful. We don't have this today. So, yeah, this is probably what I already said, so I will skip that. I saw this map coming up a couple of times yesterday, and I just had to say something about it. I didn't yesterday, but I became a little bit irritated, let's say. I went to this database and had a look, and actually this is also found in the database, and this is actually coincide perfectly with how it actually looks in Sweden. We have quite a lot of old-growth forest and pristine forest in Sweden. So please, if you show this again, use this one rather than this one. It makes a huge difference for the messages you give. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. These are examples of these unprotected potential primary forests we have in Sweden. This is an area I've been serving in 2017. All this you see here, it is old growth forest, completely unprotected, and harvesting is going on in this landscape. Hopefully within a few years this will be protected, but up until now there are huge logging notifications in this landscape. Here's another example. This whole area up to here is completely unprotected, and much of this has high value, high conservation value natural forest. There's one old clear cut here in the middle, but all the rest is. So every time we see a new logging notification in these areas, we know that this is an old growth forest. And the logging notifications in these areas, they are huge. They are hundreds of hectares usually at the time. And they leave very little consideration left after harvesting in these areas. In these forests, these kind of species that are usually quite hard to find in the rest of the forest landscape, they are found everywhere. Like this species, Scelidocutus odora, which is quite a rare species. I saw it on one image yesterday from Romania. This one, you will never find it in a previously harvested area. It is completely impossible. This one is found almost everywhere in these old growth forests. They are quite common. And of course, these bird species, they are everywhere. So all these red listed species, which are almost gone in the landscape, they are very common in these old forests. And they actually reflect what we have lost in our forest landscape. And I'm guessing that these kind of species, at least in the parts of Europe where we have a coniferous forest, these species has been quite common. Maybe not the Siberian jay, but the rest of these. And they are just gone. I made 2 reports from these old growth forest surveys we have done. We have done 4 of these. The other 2 surveys will be presented in a report that will be published before Christmas this year. It is really, really big landscapes. We have been many people surveying species, and some parts of them are actually being formally protected, but some are still open for harvesting. I have done a couple of analyses on our data, a connectivity analysis of the entire country. These are, I think these sorts of maps are quite good for the understanding of like the extent and the size of these sorts of forest landscapes that we have here. I was looking now just before I went here, this country we are in now, Hungary, it is a little bit smaller than this county. And the size of these forest landscapes that are still here, they are huge. They are extremely large. So this is the current situation. If we fail to protect the forests that are not yet protected here, we will have something looking like this. You see the change in connectivity. It is quite amazing. And we have shown these kind of maps, I think, many times at different meetings, and it is unprecedented in the EU. And it doesn't stop here, of course. It reaches over to Finland as well, and over to Russia, and it bends out here in Norway as well. So there is this huge map. And this is a picture of that. This is like a more simple analysis. It's just a moving window analysis of all the old growth forests, both protected and unprotected, that are found now. And here is if you take away all the unprotected areas, you see the difference. So here's something we need to protect. This is super valuable. I did another type of analysis. This is in southern Sweden. We have some form of protection, but the landscape is completely like depleted of old forest. It's just a lot of plantations, all of it. So there's very little to work on here. If we want to build a green infrastructure out of this, where to begin? I mean, there isn't anything to build on, really. Apart from these little patches of old forest. We have, though, a wetland survey, so we can see where we have high-quality wetlands. And there are also surveys made on the waterways, so we can know exactly where in the landscape we have really high conservation value waterways. If we were to add a buffer of forest, it can be whatever. I mean, it can be a plantation or something right now. But if we added buffers around, because in Sweden we don't have any rules against doing logging close to waterways. They do it to the edge, always, almost. So if we were to...
2 more minutes is okay?
Huh?
2 more minutes?
It's just, this is the last.
The last or the very last?
It is the last. It is the last. So if we were to add a buffer around these mires, wetlands, and waterways, we could build an infrastructure out of that. And the thing is that we know that forests close to waters and close to wetlands, they actually have a higher potential to build up high conservation values. It goes faster than it does in upland forest. This has been studied a couple of times, so we know that. So this is like a simple way to target the forest landscape for green infrastructure. So that's it. Thank you.